Good afternoon. It's about 100 degrees in Keller, Virginia, and I'm happy to be in the air conditioning, and all of my animals are in right now, so I hope they can behave for like 5 minutes while I talk to you about the Poe and Hawthorne Discussion Board. They keep getting better. I mean, I really enjoyed this discussion board, and it was a very lively and engaging conversation and discussions that were happening throughout. I just like to point out a couple of the highlights. The first discussion dealing with the Gothic elements. I loved Melissa, Sue, Susie's, and Stephen's discussion because they pulled in so many wonderful lines from the text. And also, what came up in that discussion is the ambiguity. And really, in Hawthorne and Poe both, the readings that you were discussing, there is a lot of ambiguity, and the author does that purposefully. And that is sometimes even a literary term, ambiguity, a purposeful presentation that's somewhat vague so that it can be open for interpretation, which indeed you had many interpretations. I will say that Follow the House of Usher is often not read as Roderick murdered Madeline, but I can really see what some of you were getting at. Why didn't he know she wasn't quite dead when they buried her? You know, he seemed so in tune with her all along. So maybe he did do it on purpose. I had never read it that way. I don't read a lot of criticism that suggests that. But there is an ancient prophecy of doom, and I think Joey mentioned this. There does seem to be a hint of perhaps some incest in that family. And I would refer you to page 1034 in your text. And again, it's ambiguous and open for interpretation, but on page 1034, about the third paragraph down, it was thus he spoke of the object of my visit, of his earnest desire to see me, and of the solace he expected me to afford him. He entered at some length into what he conceived to be the nature of his malady. It was, he said, a constitutional and family evil, and one for which he despaired to find a remedy. A mere nervous affection, he immediately added, which would undoubtedly soon pass off. So there's that, like, okay, he hints that it's something big, and he's like, oh, but it's not a big deal, probably. And then you kind of think of those soap operas where, somebody says something and then turns, and there's a dramatic pause and a look full of meaning, and there's a lot of that. That's that overwrought emotion thing. That is part of the Gothic sensibility. And it's not just Madeline who's overwrought emotionally. Roderick is as well. He had buried, this is on 1035, where Madeline had come in to say something, and she leaves the room. And at the very last sentence of the second paragraph, he had buried his face in his hands, and I could only perceive that a far more than ordinary wanness had overspread the emaciated fingers through which trickled many passionate tears. And then I could also take you to page 1043 if you want to see an example of somebody with overwrought emotion, where Roderick says, not hear it. Yes, I hear it and have heard it long, long, long. Many minutes, many hours, many days have I heard it, yet I dared not. Oh, pity me, miserable wretch that I am. I dared not speak. We have put her living in the tomb. Said I not that my senses were acute? I now tell you that I heard her first feeble movements in the hollow coffin. I heard them many, many days ago, yet I dared not speak. And now, tonight, Ethelred, ha ha! The breaking of the hermit's door, and the death cry of the dragon, and the clangor of the shield. Say rather the rending of the coffin, the grating of the iron hinges, and her struggles within the coppered archway and vault. Oh, whither shall I fly? I mean, I could go on, and I won't, but, my gosh, that's overwrought emotion if I ever heard it. So the discussion about that story was wonderful. The other term, metonymy of gloom. Metonymy is a literary device in which, like a part, it's a type of metaphor, and it's a type of metaphor in which the writer uses a part of something to indicate the whole. And a couple of great examples, if I say the crown, I'm speaking of the King and Queen of England, or the royal leaders of England, so the crown, or if I say I was at the college the other day and I saw the suits, I'm referring to the administration and those people who wear suits. So taking something that is an aspect of whatever the object is and using that as a way to express what the object is. And in this story, the metonymy of gloom and horror is just the things like the clanging hinges and that very the grates, the clanging grates and the hinges, the doors that inexplicably fly open, empty rooms that are lit. It's almost a stereotype. If it's like thunder and lightning and a storm coming in a castle in black and white, immediately the tone is set horror and gloom. So, Poe was in on creating that as a major genre. And so that was wonderful. For Young Goodman Brown, not as simple a story, although I know it wasn't easy to read The Fall of the House of Usher. But, I think what we have to think about, April makes a good point, is that young Goodman Brown doesn't realize at the end that everyone's not a saint. And this is his undoing. Now, Doug kind of interpreted that as to, and I'll quote Doug, if one does not hold strong and true to their faith and you stray from the path of God, you will be hit even harder and more persistently by the devil. And that is one way you can read that story, certainly, and I respect that interpretation. However, I think that Hawthorne was getting at, and he uses ambiguity in the story to great end, is that there is danger in moral absolutes or in absolutes of any kind. We also saw this in The Birthmark. You try to get at the truth purely through science, not through the heart, not through emotion, not through faith, just science, and that doesn't work. And then to look at the terms in black and white and say people are either good or evil doesn't seem to be the way to go. Some good points were made, but Robert a couple of times, zing, got to the point of something. He got to the hypocritical nature of young Goodman Brown. I don't care if he turned away at the last minute. He was there for quite a good time and quite a good while and knew he should go and shouldn't be there, and yet he stayed. And so the hypocritical nature of young Goodman Brown is hard to swallow. And it kind of links to Patrick's idea about how Hawthorne was criticizing that Puritan sentiment and that Puritan society. As you know, Hawthorne was a descendant of Judge Hathorne, who had a hand in the Salem witch trials and the hanging and the killing of a lot of people. And so he was always trying to sort of come to terms with that. Remember, this story is written in the 19th century, although it's set in Puritan New England. The other point that Robert made, and I thought it was right on, Robert said, I would have expected God to be the one to show young Goodman Brown and reveal to him the sinful ways. So yeah, I don't think you can take that the lesson is that the nature of humankind is evil, because the message is coming from the devil, and we can't believe old scratch, can we? So I love the discussion, and I liked how Rondell, even though the question wasn't really asking about Gothic elements in Hawthorne, I like how Rondell brought in some of those Gothic elements in young Goodman Brown, the supernatural, the ocular deception of the staff turning into a snake, and the traveler being able to go miles and miles and miles in only 15 minutes. So that was cool. That wasn't part of the original intent, but I like that Rondell brought that in. And Ashley's post on The Birthmark, very good. So that would be an overview of this week's discussion. I'd say that you all did a fantastic job on these stories and seem to really have gotten the point of them and gotten into them. So, Sue said it was a little more interesting to read these stories than some of the other stuff. So, I hope that you feel that way until the end of the semester. So keep up the good work and hang in there.